We're now onto the book of Leviticus, which is, I guess, our season 3. There is a slight problem with this in that the book of Leviticus is incredibly boring. I'm going to do chapters 1 to 8 today, so that's almost a third of the whole thing in one sitting, largely because there's a lot of repetition and it's just not very interesting. So I'll try and pull out some bits of it and we'll have just a very short number of videos to cover this one off, I think. I started off by having to look up what the word Leviticus actually is, but I suppose it's obvious. It refers to the tribe of Israel descended from Levi, being the son of Jacob / Israel, the one who was a bit of a psycho and went and killed all those Shechemites. To be fair, Moses and Aaron are both descendants of Levi, so everything seems to have sorted itself out down the generations. But it's said that the tribe of Levi is the priestly tribe, so hence we've said in earlier videos that God's going to make Aaron and his sons the high priests and all the rest of it. So the book is largely, it seems to be, a list of directions from God about how people are to make sacrifices, and then instructions to the priests, Aaron and all the rest of it, how they are to treat those sacrifices and what the right sacrifice should be for the right circumstances. Hence, as I say, very boring. This follows on immediately from the events in the book of Exodus, so we're still in the Sinai desert, we're still at the base of Mount Sinai, the tabernacle's just been built, and a lot of this relates to what's going to go on in there. Again, it's all extremely specific, up to the point of one of the sacrifices. It talks about, under this circumstance, you have to do this sacrifice, and then the priest has to get his finger, dip it in the blood of the bull or whatever it was, and then sprinkle it 7 times on the altar and all the rest of it. It's so bizarre. You have to, when you're cutting up an animal, to do that, you've got to wash the internal organs and the legs, specifically the legs and the internal organs, don't know. And odd stuff like if you're going to bring a grain burnt offering, then you can't burn it if it's got yeast or honey in it, because God doesn't like the smell of yeast or honey. But it's been restated that he does like the smell of barbecue, and it turns out he likes the smell of toast as well, just as long as the bread doesn't have yeast or honey in it. It seems that broadly there are 2 types of sacrifice. So you've got sacrifices that are sort of a thank you based sacrifice, although to be fair, it's not actually clear at this point what they're saying thank you for. Okay, God got them out of Egypt, but put them in a desert, and it doesn't sound like things are particularly going great. So it's not obvious that there's anything they really need to be massively thankful for. So you've got these thank offerings, and then we've got the sin offering. So if you've done something wrong, you can make a sacrifice and be forgiven for it. And it's interesting that there is actually talk of forgiveness in this. So God's saying, you mess up, you do your sacrifice, you follow these rules, and you will be forgiven. So that's sort of a slightly hopeful thing, at least. But it's still lacking in kind of why anybody should care. It's just a big old list of ceremonies and rituals you've got to perform, and there doesn't seem to be any particular benefit or not to God being on your side at this point. Is that fair to say? I suppose if that's not true if you're an Amalekite, but if you were an Amalekite, just don't go around starting fights with people. And then presumably they would have otherwise been left alone. And the Egyptians, if they hadn't oppressed the Israelites, then they would have been left alone, presumably. So it's not quite clear yet why this stuff really matters that much. That's basically all that happens, though. So in chapter 8, the priests are ordained, and then we'll go on in the next video to see what they get up to as priests. But otherwise, story-wise, there's nothing really there. It does, though, make you wonder, where did sacrifice go? I mean, you don't see people chopping up animals and spraying blood all over altars these days, thankfully. Maybe in some places, perhaps, but certainly not in the experience of this corner of the Western world that I've seen. Does that stuff seem to happen? I guess with Christianity, not wishing to get ahead, but the idea of Jesus coming and sacrificing himself for the forgiveness of sins, which I'm vaguely aware of, but we'll have to get into properly later on. That presumably takes care of the need for Christians to make sacrifices. But I don't know if they're doing it in mosques and synagogues, or if it's even legal to chop up an animal for sacrificial purposes these days. I sort of assume it's not. But I imagine that would certainly be quite shocking to anyone who wanted to join a religion and turns up and there's a bull at the front getting chopped up and blood splattered everywhere. So I assume it has largely gone as a thing, sacrifice. So either later on in the Bible we're going to find what that reason is, or it's perhaps just a another of that time sort of thing, and ritual and sacrifice is something that seemed to resonate with people at this point in human development. I know there was an absence of any sort of mention of whether the priests can marry or have to be celibate yet so far, because I've seen that's come from somewhere, whereas obviously my dad was a vicar and he was married, but in Catholicism I understand you can't. I don't know how it is for I don't know how it is in Islam or Judaism, but certainly so far there's not been any direction on that. But yeah, that's 8 chapters. That's fairly dull and repetitive, very prescriptive. Doesn't seem as a great deal there for us. The forgiveness idea is interesting, pulling that out actually. That's something hopeful at least that comes out of this one so far. And then in the next video, Aaron and his sons have now been ordained, which took 7 days, obviously. So 7 days of just hang around in a tent. It's just not obvious why anyone would bother with all this faff. And hopefully that will emerge later as well. But into the next one, we'll see what the priests get up to and if they can remember what they're supposed to be doing.